What would you do if your refrigerator stopped working tomorrow and you had 50 pounds of meat to save? Before the 1940s, that wasn't a hypothetical question. It was everyday life. Our grandparents knew secrets about preserving meat that most of us have completely forgotten. Today we're exploring 20 survival tricks they used to keep their families fed. Do you ever wonder how families managed before they could simply open a refrigerator door? Before the 1940s, most American homes had absolutely no way to keep food cold. Think about that for a moment. In 1900, only about 5% of American households even owned an icebox, and those mechanical refrigerators we take for granted today didn't become affordable for regular folks until the late 1930s. So what did people do when they butchered a 400-pound hog in November and needed that meat to last all the way through spring? They couldn't just wrap it up and stick it in the freezer. They had to know things. Real, practical knowledge that meant the difference between eating well and going hungry. You see, meat preservation wasn't some hobby or trendy skill back then. It was a matter of life and death, not convenience. These techniques fed entire armies during wartime. They sustained pioneers crossing the plains in covered wagons with no guarantee of finding food along the way. They helped ordinary families survive brutal winters when fresh game was scarce and the nearest general store might be days away by horse. Every grandmother, every grandfather, every farm wife and country butcher understood these methods because they had no other choice. The knowledge passed down through generations, mother to daughter, father to son, neighbor to neighbor. But here's the thing that really gets me. Almost all of that wisdom has been forgotten. We've traded centuries of hard-won knowledge for the convenience of a kitchen appliance. Most people today couldn't preserve a piece of meat if their lives depended on it, and thankfully, they don't have to. But there's something valuable in understanding how our ancestors solved this fundamental problem of survival. How many of these 20 preservation methods do you think you could name right now? Today we're exploring 20 proven techniques our grandparents relied upon to keep meat safe and edible for weeks, months, and sometimes even years without a single watt of electricity. Let's start with the most fundamental preservation method that humans have used for over 4,000 years. Salt was the original miracle worker when it came to keeping meat edible for months, sometimes even years. Our grandparents understood something fundamental about preservation that we've largely forgotten in our age of electric refrigerators and freezer sections. They knew that salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was a powerful weapon against spoilage, and they wielded it with impressive skill and knowledge passed down through generations. Dry salt curing was perhaps the most straightforward method, though it required patience and a good bit of that precious white mineral. The process worked on a simple principle. Coarse salt, when packed around fresh meat, would draw moisture right out of the flesh through osmosis. Without that moisture, bacteria simply couldn't survive and multiply. Our grandparents would take a fresh ham or side of bacon and rub it thoroughly with coarse salt, making sure every inch of surface was covered. Then they'd pack the meat completely in salt, sometimes adding more every few days as the first layer absorbed moisture and needed replenishing. A proper country ham required serious commitment. The old-timers used about 1 pound of salt for every pound of meat. Think about that for a moment. A 10-pound ham meant 10 pounds of coarse salt, packed around it for roughly 40 days. After that initial cure, the ham would be brushed clean and hung in a cool, dry place where it might age for up to 2 years before anyone sliced into it. The result was meat that could last through multiple winters without a single ice cube in sight. Now here's something that puts the value of this practice into perspective. Back in 1850, salt cost around 2 cents per pound. That might not sound like much until you realize that a properly cured ham represented a significant investment for a family. Salt was so precious throughout human history that Roman soldiers were sometimes paid with it. That's actually where we get the word salary, from the Latin word for salt. When your grandparents carefully measured out their curing salt, they were continuing a tradition that stretched back thousands of years. Brine soaking offered a slightly different approach that many families preferred for certain cuts of meat. Instead of packing meat in dry salt, they'd create a heavily salted water solution strong enough to float an egg. That was actually the test many grandmothers used. If a fresh egg bobbed to the surface, the brine was ready. Meat would be submerged completely in this salty bath, weighted down with a clean stone or wooden board to keep it fully covered. The beauty of brining was that it penetrated the meat more evenly than dry curing, and it had a wonderful side effect. Brined meat came out more tender and flavorful than dry-cured alternatives. The salt solution broke down tough muscle fibers while it preserved, giving you meat that was both safe to eat months later and actually pleasant to chew. Families would keep their brine barrels in the coolest part of the cellar, checking regularly to make sure the solution stayed strong and the meat stayed submerged. Do you remember helping grandparents cure a ham or make corned beef in the cellar? Those memories of cool underground rooms with their earthy smell and mysterious crocks hold a special place for many of us. Speaking of corned beef, this beloved preparation got its name from the large grain salt used in the process. Those big crystals were called corns of salt, and they worked their magic on beef brisket over several weeks. The process transformed a tough, relatively inexpensive cut into something that could travel across oceans or wait patiently in a cellar until spring. Irish immigrants brought this technique to America, where it became a cornerstone of many family food traditions. Sugar curing added another dimension to salt preservation. By combining salt with sugar, our grandparents discovered they could balance the harsh intensity of heavily salted meat while still achieving excellent preservation. The sugar didn't just improve flavor, it actually aided the moisture removal process and gave cured hams and bacon that characteristic sweetness we still associate with quality cured meats today. Many families had closely guarded recipes that specified exact ratios of salt to sugar, sometimes adding black pepper or other spices to create signature flavors. While salt preservation worked wonders, our grandparents discovered that smoke added another powerful layer of protection. Can you still smell your grandfather's smokehouse? That distinctive aroma meant food security for the whole family. There's something almost magical about how our ancestors figured out that smoke could transform fresh meat into something that would last for months, even years, without any refrigeration at all. The smoking techniques they perfected weren't just about adding flavor, though they certainly did that. These methods were genuine lifesavers that kept families fed through long winters and unpredictable times. Cold smoking was the first major technique, and it required real patience and skill. The whole idea was to expose meat to smoke at very low temperatures, typically between 68 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit. At these temperatures, the meat never actually cooked. Instead, it slowly absorbed the antimicrobial compounds from the smoke while gradually drying out. This was a delicate balance because if the temperature crept too high, you'd start cooking the meat and change the entire preservation process. Traditional smokehouses were specifically designed to keep that fire far enough away from the hanging meat that only the smoke reached it, not the heat. A properly built smokehouse kept meat hanging for 2 to 3 weeks during the cold smoking process. That's right, 2 to 3 weeks of continuous attention. Someone had to tend that fire around the clock, making sure it smoldered steadily without ever flaming up. The smoke would slowly penetrate the meat, depositing those precious compounds that kept bacteria at bay. Families who mastered this technique could keep their hams and bacon for remarkable lengths of time. Properly smoked bacon could last well over a year without any refrigeration whatsoever. Think about that for a moment. An entire year of preserved meat from nothing more than salt, smoke, and patience. The science behind why smoke works so well is fascinating. When wood burns slowly and smolders, it releases a complex mixture of chemical compounds. Among the most important are formaldehyde, acetic acid, and phenols. These aren't just fancy chemistry terms. These are the actual bacteria-killing agents that made smoke preservation possible. The formaldehyde acts as a powerful antimicrobial agent, while the acetic acid creates an acidic environment on the meat's surface that bacteria simply can't tolerate. The phenols add another layer of protection, while also contributing to that distinctive smoky flavor we all remember. Hot smoking was quite different from cold smoking, and it served a different purpose entirely. With hot smoking, temperatures ranged from 126 to 176 degrees Fahrenheit. At these higher temperatures, the meat actually cooked while it smoked. This method was perfect when you wanted meat that was ready to eat right away, but would also keep longer than fresh cooked meat normally would. The combination of cooking and smoking created a product that could last for weeks rather than days. Many families used hot smoking for sausages and smaller cuts that they planned to eat relatively soon. The choice of wood mattered enormously to our grandparents. They didn't just throw any old wood on the fire. Different hardwoods produced different results, and experienced smokers knew exactly which wood to use for which meat. Hickory was perhaps the most popular choice for pork, especially bacon and ham. It produced a strong, distinctive smoke that penetrated deeply and left that classic smoky flavor everyone associates with good country ham. Applewood was gentler, sweeter, and many preferred it for poultry or when they wanted a milder taste. Oak burned steadily and produced a medium smoke that worked well for almost anything. Some families closely guarded their specific wood combinations, passing down these preferences through generations like precious family secrets. The Walker family smokehouse in Virginia, built all the way back in 1785, processed over 2,000 pounds of pork every single year. That one small building, with nothing but fire and smoke, preserved enough meat to feed an extended family and their workers throughout the entire year. These smokehouses became essential structures on any working farm, often built with the same care as the main house itself. Continuous resmoking was another technique that extended the life of already preserved meats even further. Families would resmoke their hams every few months, refreshing that protective outer layer of antimicrobial compounds. The smoke residue on the meat's surface would naturally fade over time as it was handled and exposed to air. By periodically hanging the meat back in the smokehouse for another round of treatment, our grandparents could push the preservation even longer. Some country hams were re-smoked for years, aging like fine wine and developing increasingly complex flavors that people treasured. Before we continue, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, a like and subscribe truly helps us continue making these videos for you. We really appreciate it. Now let's explore the drying methods that transformed fresh meat into something that could last for months or even years without any refrigeration at all. Air drying. There's something almost magical about the simplest preservation method of all. Air drying required nothing more than thin strips of meat, a cool breeze, and a little patience. Our grandparents understood that bacteria need moisture to survive, and if you remove that moisture, you remove the threat of spoilage entirely. They would slice meat into strips no thicker than a 1/4 inch, then hang those strips on wooden racks or simple rope lines in areas with good airflow. The key was finding the right conditions. Too humid, and the meat would spoil before it dried. Too warm, and bacteria would multiply faster than the moisture could escape. The sweet spot was cool temperatures around 50 to 60 degrees with steady air movement and low humidity. In these conditions, thin strips of beef or venison would dry in just 3 to 5 days. What started as a pound of fresh meat would shrink down to just a few ounces. but those few ounces packed all the protein and nutrition of the original cut. Farm families often had dedicated drying areas, sometimes just a screened porch on the north side of the house where temperatures stayed cool even in summer. The finished product could last 6 months or longer when stored in cloth bags in a cool, dark place. Sun drying. In the arid regions of the American Southwest and the Great Plains, families took advantage of the most powerful dehydrator nature provides. The sun itself became their preservation tool. Sun drying worked best in climates with low humidity, where moisture could escape into the air quickly. Native peoples had perfected this technique over thousands of years, long before European settlers arrived. They would lay thin strips of buffalo, deer, or elk on wooden frames positioned to catch both sunlight and wind. The combination was powerful. Direct sunlight warmed the meat and accelerated moisture release, while steady breezes carried that moisture away. In ideal conditions, meat could dry completely in just 2 to 3 days under the hot sun. Settlers heading west learned these techniques from indigenous peoples and quickly adopted them for their own survival. The numbers tell an incredible story. A 10-pound cut of fresh beef would dry down to just 2.5 pounds of preserved meat. That's a 75% reduction in weight, but remarkably, nearly all the nutritional value remained. This made dried meat perfect for travel. Cowboys on cattle drives carried dried beef that could last 6 months, bouncing around in their saddlebags without any refrigeration at all. Pioneers heading west on wagon trains packed 50 to 100 pounds of dried meat per person for journeys that might take 4 to 6 months. That dried meat was often the difference between making it to Oregon or California and starving somewhere along the trail. Jerky making. The word jerky comes from the Quechua word charqui, meaning dried meat, and it represents one of humanity's oldest preservation methods. Native American tribes had been making jerky for at least 12,000 years before Europeans arrived, and their techniques were remarkably sophisticated. They understood that simply cutting meat into strips wasn't enough. The best jerky required removing as much fat as possible, since fat doesn't dry well and can turn rancid. They would pound the meat to break down fibers and speed drying, then season it with whatever they had available. Salt when they could trade for it, wild herbs, even smoke from specific woods that added antimicrobial compounds. By the 1800s, jerky had become essential survival food across the American frontier. Hunting families would process an entire deer in a single day, turning 100 pounds of fresh venison into 20 to 25 pounds of jerky that would feed a family through the winter. The preparation became a family affair, with everyone helping to slice, season, and hang the meat. Children learned these skills young because they were essential for survival. Did your family ever make venison jerky after hunting season? Share your memories in the comments. Many families continued these traditions well into the 20th century, passing down recipes and techniques through generations. Wind loft hanging. Perhaps the most ingenious drying location was one that used the natural advantages of the home itself. Wind loft hanging meant suspending meat in the upper rafters of barns, attics, or specially built drying lofts. Heat rises, so these upper spaces stayed warmer than ground level, which helped speed drying. At the same time, gaps in the roof and walls allowed constant air circulation. Most importantly, hanging meat high off the ground kept it away from rodents, dogs, and other pests that would happily steal a family's winter food supply. Farmers would install hooks or wooden poles across the rafters specifically for hanging meat. Some families had dedicated drying lofts with slatted walls that let air flow through freely while keeping out rain. The meat would hang for weeks, slowly losing moisture until it reached that perfect dried state. Many families combined methods, perhaps smoking their meat first, then moving it to the wind loft for final drying and long-term storage. The smoke added flavor and antimicrobial protection, while the wind loft finished the preservation process. Properly dried and stored, this meat could last an entire year, ensuring the family would never go hungry between harvests. Drying worked beautifully, but our grandparents had even more ingenious methods for sealing and protecting their preserved meats. There's something almost magical about the way our grandparents thought about preservation. They understood that meat's worst enemy wasn't just bacteria or time, it was air itself. Once they figured that out, they developed some of the most ingenious protective methods you could imagine. These techniques created barriers between precious meat and the outside world, and the results were nothing short of remarkable. Fat sealing was one of the most elegant solutions our ancestors ever devised. The concept was beautifully simple. Cooked meat, when completely surrounded by rendered fat, couldn't spoil because nothing could reach it. Grandmothers would cook pork, chicken, or beef until it was thoroughly done, then pack it tightly into stoneware crocks. While the meat was still warm, they'd pour hot rendered lard, or tallow, right over it, making sure every single air pocket was filled. As that fat cooled and solidified, it created an airtight seal that bacteria simply couldn't penetrate. Families in the 1800s kept meat preserved this way for 6 months or longer, pulling out portions as needed and carefully resealing the surface each time. The French perfected this method with their legendary confit technique. Duck and goose were slowly cooked in their own rendered fat, then stored submerged in that same fat in cool cellars. A properly made duck confit could last well over a year, and many families swore it actually tasted better after several months of aging. The fat didn't just preserve the meat, it also kept it incredibly moist and tender. When you were ready to eat, you'd simply scrape away the fat, crisp up the skin, and enjoy something truly extraordinary. Wax sealing took a different approach but worked on the same principle of blocking air exposure. After meat had been dried or smoked, the cut ends remained vulnerable to moisture and contamination. Our grandparents solved this by dipping those exposed ends in melted beeswax or paraffin. The wax hardened almost instantly, creating a waterproof barrier that insects couldn't penetrate and moisture couldn't pass through. Hunters and travelers especially favored this technique because wax-sealed meat could handle rough handling during transport. The coating protected against bumps and scrapes while maintaining that crucial seal against the elements. Wood ash coating might sound strange to modern ears, but it was remarkably effective and cost absolutely nothing. Clean wood ash from cooking fires was collected and rubbed thoroughly over meat surfaces. The ash created a dry, alkaline environment that insects avoided completely. Flies wouldn't lay eggs on ash-coated meat, and the alkaline nature helped inhibit bacterial growth. Families often combined ash coating with other methods, first salting or smoking meat, then giving it an ash coating before hanging it in storage areas. The grayish appearance wasn't appetizing, but you'd simply brush off the ash before cooking, and the meat underneath remained perfectly preserved. But perhaps no preservation method captures the ingenuity of our ancestors quite like pemmican. This incredible food sustained entire expeditions and kept communities alive through brutal winters. The process started with lean meat, usually buffalo or deer, that was dried until brittle and then pounded into powder. This meat powder was mixed with an equal amount of rendered fat while both were warm. Some families added dried berries like Saskatoon or choke cherries for extra nutrition and flavor. The mixture was packed into rawhide bags or formed into cakes and bars. The numbers around pemmican are truly staggering. A single pound contained approximately 3,500 calories, making it one of the most energy-dense foods ever created. The Hudson's Bay Company recognized this value and purchased over 100,000 pounds of pemmican annually during the 1800s to supply their vast network of trading posts and exploration parties. Fur traders and mountain men carried pemmican as their primary food source during months-long journeys through wilderness where hunting might be unreliable. What really amazes people today is pemmican's incredible shelf life. When stored properly in cool, dry conditions, pemmican could last 20 to 30 years while remaining perfectly safe and nutritious. Think about that. Meat preserved without any refrigeration whatsoever, lasting for decades. Archaeological evidence suggests some indigenous peoples created pemmican caches that were discovered and consumed by later generations, still perfectly edible after being buried for years. Among these sealing methods, which one surprises you most? The idea of meat lasting decades seems impossible today, yet our grandparents knew exactly how to make it happen. Beyond these direct preservation methods, our grandparents also mastered the art of using their environment for natural refrigeration. Before we had electric refrigerators humming in our kitchens, our grandparents understood something fundamental about the earth itself. They knew that nature provided its own refrigeration system, and they were remarkably clever about harnessing it. These natural cold storage methods kept families fed through long winters and sweltering summers alike, and the engineering behind them was surprisingly sophisticated. Underground storage pits. The ground beneath your feet holds a secret that our ancestors understood perfectly well. Once you dig down below the frost line, typically 4 to 6 feet depending on where you lived, the earth maintains a remarkably stable temperature year-round. We're talking about 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, whether it's the dead of winter or the hottest day in August. That consistency was pure gold for food preservation. Families would dig these storage pits, sometimes called root cellars, when they were more elaborate, and line them carefully with stones or bricks to prevent collapse and keep moisture at bay. The entrance was always angled or covered with heavy wooden doors and sometimes packed with straw for additional insulation. The goal was to create a stable environment that stayed cool in summer and prevented freezing in winter. Think about that for a moment. No electricity, no mechanical parts, just the natural insulating properties of the earth doing the work. These underground spaces served double duty for most families. Fresh vegetables like potatoes, carrots, turnips, and apples stored beautifully in the cool, humid environment. But meat preservation happened here too. Salted hams, smoked bacon, and cured sausages hung from the rafters or sat in crocks, the cool temperatures dramatically slowing any bacterial growth. A well-constructed root cellar could keep preserved meats in good condition for months on end. The placement of these pits mattered enormously. Smart homesteaders built them into hillsides when possible, taking advantage of the natural earth covering on 3 sides. They oriented the entrance away from the prevailing summer sun and made sure drainage directed water away from the structure. Every detail was intentional because a flooded or poorly ventilated cellar meant spoiled food and a hungry family. Spring house cooling. Now, if you were fortunate enough to have a natural spring or cold running creek on your property, you had access to something even better than an underground pit. Spring houses were small stone or brick buildings constructed directly over or adjacent to these cold water sources, and they were engineering marvels in their simplicity. The science here is straightforward but effective. Spring water emerges from the ground at a consistent temperature, usually between 45 and 50 degrees year-round. By channeling this water through a small enclosed building, families created a natural refrigeration unit that maintained temperatures around 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit even during the brutal August heat. That's cold enough to significantly extend the life of fresh meat, dairy, and other perishables. Spring houses in Pennsylvania and throughout Appalachia became essential features of successful farms. The cold running water flowed through channels cut into the stone floor, and families placed crocks of butter, jugs of milk, and containers of fresh meat directly in the water or on shelves just above it. The constant flow meant the temperature never fluctuated, and the natural humidity kept things from drying out too quickly. Does anyone remember their grandparents' spring house or root cellar? Those stone buildings stayed remarkably cool. If you were a child in the mid-20th century visiting grandparents on a farm, you might remember being sent to the spring house to fetch butter or cream. That blast of cool, damp air when you opened the heavy wooden door felt almost magical on a hot summer day. Ice house storage. Perhaps the most impressive of these natural cold storage methods was the ice house. In northern regions where winters produced thick ice on ponds and lakes, families harvested this frozen bounty and stored it for use throughout the warmer months. A well-built ice house could keep 50 tons of ice frozen from January clear through September. That's 8 months of natural refrigeration from one winter's harvest. The construction of these buildings was critical. Thick walls, sometimes double-layered with an air gap between them, provided insulation. The ice blocks, cut precisely from frozen ponds during the coldest weeks of winter, were packed tightly together and surrounded with sawdust, straw, or wood shavings. These materials trapped air and created incredible insulating barriers that dramatically slowed melting. Here's something that might surprise you. The Tudor Ice Company shipped ice from Massachusetts all the way to India in the 1830s. That journey took 4 months by sailing ship through tropical waters, and they still had ice to sell when they arrived. That's how effective proper insulation and packing techniques were. If entrepreneurs could move ice halfway around the world, certainly a farm family could keep their ice house stocked through a Pennsylvania summer. Families used this stored ice throughout the warm months, chipping off pieces to pack around fresh meat, chill cream, or preserved fish caught in nearby streams. The ice house became a central feature of food preservation strategy, particularly for those occasional times when fresh meat needed to be kept cold for a few days before smoking or salting could be completed. These 3 natural cold storage methods worked together on successful homesteads. The root cellar provided long-term storage for cured meats and vegetables. The spring house offered consistent cooling for dairy and short-term meat storage. The ice house provided intense cold when truly needed. Together, they formed a complete cold chain that required nothing but understanding of natural principles and hard work to construct and maintain. Our grandparents also understood that certain acids and fermentation processes could preserve meat without any refrigeration at all. Do you remember the unique tang of grandmother's pickled meats or homemade summer sausage? That distinctive flavor came from one of nature's most powerful preservation secrets, and our grandparents understood it perfectly, even if they didn't know the science behind it. Vinegar pickling. Long before anyone understood pH levels or bacterial growth, folks discovered that soaking cooked meat in vinegar kept it edible for weeks or even months. The acid in vinegar creates an environment so hostile to harmful bacteria that they simply cannot survive. German families would make hundreds of pounds of pickled pig's feet and souse meat each fall, storing them in ceramic crocks in the cellar. The process was straightforward but required attention to detail. First, you'd cook the meat thoroughly, then pack it into clean jars or crocks, and finally cover everything with a mixture of vinegar, salt, and sometimes sugar. Spiced vinegar solutions added flavor while doing the important work of preservation. Head cheese, pickled tongue, and various offal preparations all benefited from this acidic bath. Families stretched their meat supply considerably because even the less desirable cuts became palatable and safe when pickled properly. The tangy results weren't just preserved food, they became beloved regional specialties passed down through generations. Fermented sausages. Now here's where things get really interesting. Fermentation was likely discovered by accident, but our ancestors perfected it over centuries into a true art form. Traditional Italian salami ferments for 60 to 90 days, developing beneficial bacteria that create lactic acid and preserve the meat from the inside out. Think about that for a moment. They were essentially using friendly bacteria to fight off dangerous ones, and this was happening in farmhouse kitchens long before microscopes existed. The process started with ground meat mixed with salt, curing agents, and specific bacterial cultures, though back then those cultures came naturally from the environment. As the sausages hung in cool, humid conditions, the good bacteria multiplied and produced lactic acid, dropping the pH low enough to prevent spoilage. The result was shelf-stable meat that could hang in the pantry for months. Summer sausage got its name because it was one of the few meat products that could be made in warmer months and still keep without refrigeration. Hungarian salami, Spanish chorizo, French saucisson. These weren't just recipes, but survival techniques refined across hundreds of years. Spice rub preservation. Black pepper was so valuable for preservation that it was worth its weight in silver in medieval times. That's not an exaggeration. Antimicrobial spices, including pepper, cloves, juniper, and coriander, did more than add flavor. They actively slowed spoilage during the drying process. Cloves contain eugenol, a compound that fights bacteria and mold. Pepper has piperine with similar protective properties. Our grandparents rubbed these precious spices into meat before hanging it to dry, creating a protective barrier that extended storage life significantly. The spice-crusted exterior kept insects away while inhibiting surface bacterial growth. This is why traditional dried meats and sausages always featured bold spice flavors. It wasn't just about taste, though the taste was certainly appreciated. It was about keeping food safe through the long winters when fresh meat was impossible to come by. These acid-based and fermentation methods created some of the most beloved preserved foods still enjoyed today. Every time you slice into a good salami or enjoy pickled meat at a deli, you're tasting techniques that kept our ancestors alive through the hardest times. This knowledge deserves to be remembered. These 20 methods kept our grandparents fed through the harshest winters and the leanest times, and this knowledge truly deserves to be preserved for future generations. And there you have it, 20 remarkable preservation methods that kept our grandparents fed through some of the hardest times in American history. When you really think about it, these techniques represent thousands upon thousands of years of accumulated human wisdom. Every single method we talked about today was perfected through generations of trial and error, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, from father to son, until it became second nature to folks who never had the luxury of simply plugging in a refrigerator. Our grandparents and great-grandparents weren't just surviving, they were mastering their environment in ways that most of us have completely forgotten. They understood the science of preservation before science even had a name for it. They knew that salt draws out moisture and that smoke contains compounds that fight bacteria, even if they'd never heard those words used that way. Their survival skills deserve to be remembered and honored, not as relics of a primitive past, but as genuine wisdom that kept families alive. And here's something worth considering. This knowledge could prove valuable again. We live in uncertain times, and the skills that fed families during the Great Depression and through World War II rationing remain just as valid today. Many of these techniques are actually experiencing a real revival among homesteaders and folks who believe in being prepared for whatever comes next. Every family has preservation stories worth sharing. Which of these 20 methods did your family use? We'd love to hear your memories in the comments below. Maybe your grandmother made pemmican, or perhaps your grandfather had a smokehouse out back. Those stories matter, and they deserve to be told. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and share it with a friend who might remember these times. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another journey into yesterday.